Here's the newest edition, I think, of Blue Max, which came out by Strata Libre, which I think is an Italian company. And I'm going to do something a little different with this. I actually bought this before I bought the old copy of Blue Max that I got. And my disappointment with what I had here drove me to keep looking for the original. But I do want to show some comparison to it, because it's not just, it's certainly not a complete duplication of the old game with maybe better components or something. There's new things here. There's a bunch of dice, for example. What's up with that? The air counters have additional information on them. And there's some additional play aid counters as well, like, I don't know if these are ammo or fuel. I think these are ammo, these are fuel. You got little markers, I guess, for tailing and targeting and stuff like that, which are all very helpful things to some extent. You got new player, new sheets to record your movement on. It doesn't really provide any additional functionality. Whether it's nice or not is another question. You've got, instead of the old sheets that represented the movement chart, you now have them presented on individual player aids. There's 3 for each plane, a little bit more on that later, and you don't have to cut apart a booklet. You know, you've got something useful here. But what's more is the use of color, etc., allows them to express some of the special cases about these. So these actually are really, really nice, and I could see a redesign based on these of some of the planes in here. Now the reason you need that redesign is that this game only includes 6 planes. I don't remember what the original had, maybe close to 20. It wasn't enough, and certainly more than a dozen. It wasn't enough planes, but at least it gave you a chance to examine a broader scope of the different planes that you have. So this game only gives you the Fokker DR1, and it gives you 3 copies of that. The Albatross D3, now this is kind of weird because the D3 isn't really, I don't know, we can go on. The Halberstadt, which is really weird because nobody ever uses the fucking Halberstadt in Blue Max. It's a crappy plane. The Newport 24, which I'm not used to seeing. It's the Newport 17 I'm used to seeing because it's the only plane available to the Allies for a while, or to the Entente for a while. The Bristol, which is a monster, and maybe one of the most powerful planes in the game. But it has its issues. It's not very maneuverable. And the Sopwith triplane, which is kind of a crappy triplane. Now, the DR1 is also a triplane. The advantage of doing this and focusing on getting, 3 copies of each plane is that players can are perhaps more aligned to do the historical type scenarios, which would be a flight of 3 identical planes operating together, rather than the kind of mishmashes of random planes that Blue Max, especially under the campaigns scenario rules, tends to generate. Of course, in certain eras, you'll see things like the Central Powers, hey, the Albatross D5 is definitely the best plane out there at that point. Everybody should be flying one, except there's some joker like me who wants to fly the Falls, or somebody who wants the DR1. You also have these screens, and you have 6 of these, so that kind of limits you to components available for 3 players on each side. What's nice about these is they give you a quick summation of the rules for firing weapons, which works different here. A summary of all the special effects from damage. Now this is important because in the base game, in the original game, you have to go look up what your damage counter means in a lot of cases. They try to tell you some stuff, but there's a few of them that you have to look up, and that can be really a tell. These are supposed to be secret, so that's a big deal. And then the turn sequence here. And like I said, you have 6 of these available. instead of a chart with information on all the planes, you have 3 copies of cards for each plane. Different images on it so that they match the plane on here. And these contain all the information you need, not terribly easily readable to my eyes. The number of hits that you have in each location, the stability level of the plane, how much fuel it carries, its maximum altitude, which is handled pretty much the same, and then some information on the back that's not really relevant to the game. So again, you know, they're looking at, hey, let's give you something that's kind of a neat component item, but this is really kind of unuseful because you transfer all the information from here onto here. It's just as easy to do that from a chart. So this is one of the things that I think they added that was kind of a waste. They also provide you with these tailing cards. You get 1 set of these, which means you have to hand this, each time somebody wants to do has to give tailing information, they get the entire set, select a card for left, straight, or right, and a number to indicate what their altitude is going to be that they programmed in on here. Potentially useful, you know. I think the counters work just as well, and the counter set that I had to print up myself. Actually, I don't think there were tailing counters in the original, so you had to kind of write something down and show it to them or whisper it to them or something like that. So those definitely add something to it. But the fact that there's only 1 set of them is kind of painful. These are your damage cards, and instead of chits, you have these. And you can see you have many different sets. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the choice of cards, but what about the player markers? Well, ammo was easy enough to track on the sheet. It's cleaned up the sheet and made it easier to not have the ammo on there. These little markers for tailing and targeting and stuff like that, they're overall useful. I find that you need something like that kind of. I don't know what the hell this is for. I have not played this version, so it looks like you have 1 per plane, and it's used to show, it's called a ready marker. It's used to show that your plane has not moved yet, and then you move off of it and settle elsewhere. You've got some effects counters here like fire. I guess that's dead pilot. I'm not sure. Smoke on the other side, maybe a dead observer. Again, potentially useful. You know what I don't see? I don't see a spin marker, which is actually useful. Although the player can record spins down. But if you've got somebody stuck in a spin, that's kind of a neat little piece of information. That disappeared from the game, and I'm not sure you need all this many of these targeting and tailing type markers. Okay. So, what's changed? Oh, one more component item. You have a hard map. And you can see it's got an image on this side of a battlefield, kind of like Richthofen's War, but then you have kind of the original blank map image on that side if people don't want the confusion of the prettier side. And you can argue one way or another whether or not a paper map is better than a hard map. My own views are a little mixed. This seems to lie flat, much flatter than the paper map does. Overall, I think it's an advantage. It's prettier, it's sturdier, but the inclusion of that, the cards, everything else, has turned a little game that you could throw into, you know, I don't know, a little satchel or something pretty easily. It's not really small enough for what I consider kind of the coffee shop game that you just drop in a pocket and take with you. But this is fairly light and easy to carry to something this big. Now, granted, a lot of this is insert, and you probably would be getting rid of the insert if they had ever designed this game, if they had ever completed the development of this game as a expandable type thing. Because I think what the intention was to add some sort of expansion that presented more planes. Unfortunately, the people who liked Blue Max originally were probably very disappointed with this and either didn't buy it or bought it and didn't show much interest in an expansion for it. They're like, well, the original's better. I'm going to go hunt that down, or screw it. It's not enough here. And for newer style gamers, you know, it's still close to the old game, and that old game may not be as appealing as things like Wings of War are to the newer players. If you're going to have to buy expansions and crap like that, well, maybe you're into that kind of collectible model. I mean, I hated Wings of War because basically I could fly one plane versus one plane, and that's it. And there were other issues with the minis type, using the cards kind of as minis or whatever, just because you had something different from a board. With a board, you can scroll stuff more easily. You didn't have to measure things out, all kind of crap like that. The hex grid provides something there. Oh, you know what I didn't explain is what the hell I'm doing here. I'm just going to do a compare and contrast of this, because I do not want to actually play out another Blue Max scenario. It's not the easiest game in the world to solo. It's plotted movement, so it's not a lot of fun to do so, and I'm a little fatigued from doing the last one. I think the most valuable thing I can give you is what the difference between the two is, since I have these two systems. Okay, for the most part, they are almost exactly the same, minus the damage system. However, a few things have been left out of this game, and a few things have been kind of clarified and nailed down, which maybe I've been playing wrong in Blue Max when I played the original, and the groups I played with played it wrong. But so it does work out a little different. So like some of the explanations on here, for example, in my playthrough, I did only the 1S1 was a stall. It turns out all three of these maneuvers are actually stalls, and that's clearly marked out by this, not by the exclamation point. I don't know, it's clearly called out somewhere in the rules, but what's helpful on that chart is, if I can find it, here we go. There's a listing of how to interpret the new colors, etc., that are being presented on here, and what relies on what. So like speed of a maneuver is clearly related not just to the position on the chart, but actually the number of hexes that are present in the maneuver. So speed 1 has only one hex in it at all. Speed 2 has you move one more hex, and speed 3 has this. I don't think the original rules covered that. If they did, I sure the hell didn't catch it. This does a good job of saying, hey, what's the speed of a maneuver? It actually calls it out. The rulebook's not particularly better organized in terms of like giving you case numbers that allow you to reference, but it doesn't define things as well, like where the speed of a maneuver is, which is of some importance, because you're only allowed, so let's see, yeah, you're only allowed to increase your speed by 1. And notably, what it's not in either system is it's not the number at the end. This is a speed 2 maneuver with a 1 on that rightmost number. That's just the fuel expenditure. You can go faster or slower sometimes, and still expend different amounts of fuel based on that. So like this is a speed 1 maneuver with a 2 fuel expenditure, for example. This is a speed 2 with a 1 fuel expenditure. Okay. And if you want to kind of understand the base flow of the game, most of it is already covered in my Blue Max original thing, and maybe somebody else did a video on this. I didn't look to see if there were any on this. So that's kind of useful having those called out. But let's go back to what we have in here that we want to talk about. If there's anything additional that we want to talk about. And there is. They call out an initial starting maneuver on each plane, which is marked by this little symbol. Again, those are a little hard to read, at least with my eyes. They're probably better on the camera. And that's just the maneuver that you come onto the battlefield with. It's a pretty decent choice because you're not going to be doing anything too fancy. So here's the thing. This hardly matters, but the speed of your last maneuver affects the speed of your next maneuver. So, you know, whatever you enter the board with is presumably of some importance. I didn't view this as a big game changer. It's okay if you can pick any maneuver you like, as far as I'm concerned. And now that's limited. Fuel has become an optional rule. I think it was before, yeah. And it has the same effects that it did. There are now collisions, but only if you're playing with the altitude optional rule. And basically 2 planes have to be in the same space at the same altitude. Now there's a problem with this because that was how you flew as a formation in the original game. That's gone now. Not that we ever did that, but now if 2 planes are in the same location, there's a chance they might collide and they do damage to each other using the draws from the chart or the cards. Okay, the biggest difference here is firing weapons. So for firing weapons, you start with, what, 3 dice to begin with, okay? And then you add dice if you're doing a longer burst. Notice the difference between medium and long is always the same. It's not based on the range anymore. And now you check for special effects. One additional, am I missing something here? He determines the distance from the plane and lose. Oh, okay, so distance is in effect to some extent. So you start with 3 dice. You lose dice for every hex distance between you and the plane. Now note, there is no guaranteed 3 hex maximum. You can shoot further than that. And I don't know if that's good or bad. You didn't used to be able to do that. So you might end up with negative dice, but do a longer burst and be able to hit. I'm not sure how legitimate that works out to be. But anyway, you take a number of dice, subtract the distance from the plane, and then the type of burst affects additional dice. Now, in the original system, we had somewhat more detail here, which is this little chart. And I gotta admit, this chart is a pain compared to this. But I think it achieved a little bit more. At least I can't guarantee how much more accurate it was, but it achieved a level of detail that allows for more fine-tuning of the accuracy of the model. And I think it does some things correctly. So in some cases here, for example, the speed of the attacker, the further away you are, the bigger an effect that has. I'm not sure I believe that, but that's what they wrote down. A single gun affects you more if you're further out. And some other things. Different altitude affects you more the further out they are, for whatever reason. Again, not sure how much I believe the choices that were made there, which may be one reason why those were dropped. The stability of the plane affects your dice slightly. And then some additional things which kind of match some of the other stuff. And you get a bunch of dice. And you roll those dice. And this is a pretty good roll. That would give me 3 red hits. You can also get blue hits, and you can get misses. When you do that, you compare the attitude with which you're hitting the enemy plane from. So each plane has an A, a B, a C, and a D. Okay, this is similar to some aspects of the old system. In the old system, you would draw chits, and if you were directly in front or directly behind the plane you're shooting at, it would convert engine and tail hits from one to the other. But if you were at all skewed from that, and that included something that is no longer, I think, in here, which is the concept of deflection. again, for good or evil. The concept of deflection is gone now, but if you had any deflection at all, you would never get any of those conversions. Now what you have, if you're firing at the head-on location, not directly head-on, but anywhere in that arc, you use one deck of cards that presumably causes hits to different areas. Now, here, for example, this shows engine hits, okay? You have to be able to look at this picture and discern that, and I find that a little harder than the text. This, I guess, is wings. I don't know what the fuck this is. It's fuselage, but I think you're hitting something more here. It's jamming your machine gun. And I think that's the firing guns that are jammed, but I'm not positive. It's not really spelled out here. The pilot's machine gun cannot fire until unjammed. It may be a jamming when hitting the enemy gun, which is a little weird. Smoke and fire. What do the little red dots and stuff like that mean? You know, damned if I know. Let's keep looking. Okay. I'm not seeing something on there. After marking damage and noting that the player discards his damage cards face down in a discard pile, then you reshuffle. So this is totally different. In Blue Max, the way it used to work, you draw chits until you get, you take all the hits that you're going to take that round. And then you return all the chits and reshuffle the cup, which means this new system has the, oh look, the pilot killed card or whatever. Once that's out, you know you're safe from that and you can start taking more risks. I don't like that. I don't like that effect of the cards. Obviously, you could kind of duplicate the old system to some extent by reshuffling the decks after each plane's getting hit. However, that has its own disadvantage, which is that reshuffling a deck of cards is a harder thing to do than throwing some chits in a cup and shaking it up. Of course, some people might not like the randomization of shaking in a cup, but whatever. All right, Lewis guns become an optional rule. In what way? Well, mainly that they use ammo. Okay, so you don't record ammo for Lewis guns. That's a big deal. The Bristol becomes mighty if it doesn't have ammo restrictions. So I would definitely suggest you play with that optional rule. The Observer himself is an optional rule, which means if you're not playing with any optional rules, you've got a problem that things like the Bristol and the Halberstadt are really horrible planes. So, I mean, I'm assuming you'd be playing with both optional rules if you play with either. The altitude rule is pretty much the same. There's things like this that look like, you know, when you're flipping through the rule book, you might think, oh, cool, there's rules for reconnaissance and bombing missions. No, this is just historical crap on there. Over here, it's not. You know, this is something to do with the game itself. Here, though, obviously all historical. Now, things like this, a player can choose maneuver 1S1 slow stall if possible. A player whose end rolls a die, he rolls this. That seems to indicate the stall rule. That's taken directly from the old rules. And that's what led me to not think the 1L1 and 1R1 are stalls. Elsewhere in this rule book, they are defined as stalls, for whatever that matters. That is really about it in terms of difference. So what you're getting with this is a game very much like the old Blue Max, with some play aids that'll help, especially this. These are beautiful, and I would totally suggest, you know, if you have the old Blue Max, trying to devise things that follow this format to replace those old sheets. Maybe even just marking up your photocopies of the old sheets with them. Some additional counters that help a little bit. For the most part, not much value added. The big difference, oh, I forgot to mention some of the things that are missing. The big difference is the dice-based combat system. The dice makes it more simple. The cards don't give you the same kind of results necessarily as you're going to get off the chits, because you're not getting by the rules, you're not getting a constant reshuffle. So what is missing that's important to me? Well, the number of planes and the campaign game. Now, Blue Max is a fairly simple air combat game, and to tell you the truth, for any kind of air-to-air, you know, combat where you're flying in one plane and everything, playing it one-off, maybe playing a couple of scenarios, it's okay, but who cares? You know, what was really exciting to me was playing this sucker multiple times a month and bringing the same characters in, seeing the advance of the characters as they got their skill points and abilities. Kind of like an RPG, but I mean, you're not doing any role-playing here, right? You're just beyond like, curses, Red Baron, you know. Watching the different plane types come into existence and everything. All that was the fun for me of Blue Max. That's the stuff that made this game magical. I would, except for the fact that this was an easy game to get a lot of people into playing, I would far and away prefer playing Wings. There. One copy of it, which is a much, much more detailed game of a similar type of nature. You're seated in one plane, you're plotting movement, but it's got a lot more detail in terms of both the flying and the combat and the planes, and I think a lot more accuracy to it. But this is a down and dirty version of that pre-plotted sci-move air-to-air combat in World War I. And I prefer this to the Down in Flames type games, which also you could play in a similar sort of fashion, you know, kind of loose pick-me-up, because the campaign works better for them, for me, but also because, although some of the historical campaigns in Down in Flames are really great, because one of the problems I have with this campaign is it's just, hey, let's go dogfight again. Let's go dogfight again. There's no missions. What I like about the Down in Flames campaigns, like 8th Air Force had one, that had a series of them, is that you fight battle after battle, and you have the same stock of planes to use across several different events that are happening, and the results might affect what's going to happen later, as well as generating victory points. But anyway, for me, the most exciting thing about Blue Max was being able to get together with a group and regularly play it and see that kind of character advancement type stuff. I could see where Gunslinger might have that same kind of flavor to it. Chris, the particulars of how action selection and the pre-programming and everything in Gunslinger works, I don't like that as much as this. So, you know, this just works really well for me. It's simple, like an Ace of Aces type game. It feels very much like the same kind of thinking, but it's multiplayer, and you know, it's got these campaign rules that allow you to very easily figure out. To give you a framework to hang your individual scenarios on. But the new one does not have that, and for me, that's the lose. That's the deal breaker for this game, is not having the campaign rule and not having enough planes. And I understand why they don't have enough planes. The lack of campaign rule, probably because they don't have enough planes, and they don't have the historical path for the planes and everything. For the lack of planes, it's because they decided to go in for these heavy-duty components and they just can't print. You know, I mean, look, this is what they have. Six times 3, 18 planes total, right? Compare that to these. I mean, not every plane had 3 copies for it in the original. Some had more, some had less, based on how common the planes were. And just, it gave you so many different opportunities. It gave you the ability to see the changes in air combat over this small period, at least through the lens of this very light game. What would I do? Well, I could see modifying, I could see buying this if I had this. Buying this first meant I had to get this. I definitely needed it because this was insufficient. This could be a neat little expansion in terms of improvement of quality of components for the regular Blue Max. You can still use the regular planes on here, but it's giving you some additional things. I would duplicate some of these suckers. Now, the fact that my Blue Max came without the combat shits might mean that I want to use the cards anyway and the modern combat system. I don't know that I see too much wrong with that new combat system, simply because I don't think Blue Max got the combat system right enough in the original. I'm just not that impressed with the distinctions of that chart, and this is a lot easier to cope with these little screens that give you the information you need. Certainly devising and printing up something like this would not be too hard with the additional information on it. And other than that, I don't know what to say. I mean, as a standalone, I don't think this is worth it at all. I have Blue Max, and maybe I can improve, you know, I get a hard board, I get some neat little play type things. Maybe I like the faster combat of the dice, and you know, if I make enough of these for all the different planes, I've improved my Blue Max game somehow a little bit. Not a lot, and you know, there's a cost and effort to trying to improve your game. It also has a little bit of, I found the rules a little bit easier to absorb certain things that maybe aren't even explained in here, but that, you know, with the maneuver chart, that I think they kind of surprised me. And I was like, oh, so that's what they mean by it. Huh, well, that's not how it reads. All right, let me send this up. And again, I didn't want to do a playthrough of it. I obviously can't review it, but my review thoughts are pretty much the same as Blue Max, except that it's lacking the one thing that really made Blue Max cool. So, there.